Hello, welcome to this part of my Reverb series about FMOD. In this part, we're going to look at the Meta plugin for FMOD, which is quite an incredible tool, honestly, and I felt like I slept on it for quite a long time because it provides you with acoustic ray tracing, which really is an awesome feature because you get a sense of the environment around you with a really simple setup, and it's taking the Unity or Unreal environment and getting like acoustic properties from that, which is really, really incredible. So we're going to look into the setup of how to set the plugin up in FMOD, how to set it up in Unity, and then about the different components you can use and hopefully want to use inside of Unity in combination with FMOD. So, starting out with the setup, we first go to Meta Horizon's download page for the Meta XR Audio SDK for FMOD. You have to keep in mind that you could use the Audio SDK just in Unity, just in Unreal, or for Wise, so it's important to have the FMOD version and then just download the most current one. So I'm currently on 77, but they're actually updating every once in a while, so might already be 80 something when you watch the video. So you just quickly accept all licensing, and after the download is finished, we unzip the downloaded folder, and then we actually have two opportunities because Meta either allows us to place the SDK files in our FMOD project file, which I would recommend if you're sharing the project file with other team members so they automatically have those plugins as well. Or you could actually link the SDK files to your FMOD instance, so it's basically available in all projects. I'm going to link the SDK to the project for now, so you quickly see how that is done, but the process is quite similar for doing the same thing for your whole FMOD program. You can find a quick tutorial on how this is done in Meta's setup page. So, in the FMOD folder, we're looking for the studio one, and in there they recommend copying the PNG file as well. I'm not really sure if that's necessary, but I'm just going to do it as well. Then you have to create a new folder called plugins, or if you already have one, use that one. Paste in the PNG. And as we are on 2.03, that's 2.02 and later, I'm going to copy that JS file. And lastly, I need the extension file from my corresponding operating system. Here you need to keep in mind that you would need the SDK file for all systems you want FMOD with the Meta SDK to run on. So potentially you have a Mac user in your team, so you would need to copy the Mac file as well. As I'm on Windows, I simply need the .dll. I'm gonna quickly copy that as well. Then we actually need to link basically the same files to our Unity project. So it's important that you copied the previous steps and not cut and paste them so they're still in the same folder so you can still reference them. So for that, I'm quickly going to change to the directory of the demo project we will refer to. In the project directory itself, we're going to look for the asset folder and then plugins, then FMOD, and then platforms. The path is a bit tricky, and actually the support from the Meta page is not really sufficient, so I'm going to do that step by step. Then now in Unity, it's important that you link all system platforms you actually want to deploy your program on. So for example, if you're using a VR thing, you would need the Android SDK as well. If you're deploying for Windows, the Windows platform, and you need the one your editor is running on. So, for example, if you develop on Windows, deploy for Android, you need both of those platforms. As I'm doing everything on Windows, I'm just going to stick to Windows and just copy that. In the Windows folder, we go into lib for the library and then the x86_64 and going to copy the following files in there from the folder we downloaded from the meta page. The files we need are basically the same than we just copied in our FMOD folder. So one option is to basically just copy them from there, or I'm quickly going to do the same steps again. So you once again see where those files are coming from. It's the system file for Windows, then the PNG, and as well the JS. I'm actually not really sure if you would need the JS file inside of Unity as well. I'm just copying them for the sake of having everything complete in my Unity project as well. Perfect. That's everything regarding file copying. And now we're quickly going to switch to Unity because there is another step we have to take there. So this is the Unity project. I've been demonstrating some other things in my previous videos, so we're just gonna stick to that project. It's basically the sample scene from the first-person controller demo pack, if I'm not fully mistaken. It's called Starter Assets, yeah. Inside of Unity, we need to bring up the package manager, and then with that plus install package from Tarball. For this, the path is already open. Inside of the Meta SDK folder we downloaded, we need to bring up the Unity folder, and then there is this .tgz file, which we can then open. And it's gonna quickly take a second, because this is basically importing all the Unity scripts and components we can then use inside of Unity for some additional effects, which I'll explain in a second. Perfect. Next step inside of Unity is to bring up the FMOD settings, and then for platform specific, both editor, default, and any other platforms you configured and want to use your Meta SDK in, you need to specify this as dynamic plugin. So with the plus, you add an entry and simply have to type in the name. So this is Meta XR Audio FMOD. Sadly, you cannot drag in a file or something, so you have to type it out and make sure there's no typo in it and no space at the end or anything, because then it's not going to be able to load the plugin. As I said, I'm going to do that for the editor and default, because default is basically the program we're going to export. Editor is what we see inside of the Unity editor, and we want to be able to have representative audio in the editor as we have in the build program. Now, after all those steps, we actually bring up FMOD again, because now we are actually able to add meta plugins inside of FMOD. So if you hover over Add Effect, Plugin Effect, then there's this new category of meta. We're gonna dive in the source and Ambisonics thing in a second, but the important thing you need to add is the Meta XR audio reflections once on your master track. So we're gonna switch to the mixer view, select the master bus, and then select the reflections. Because this is basically applying all the computed reflections to the audio signal, which is routed through that effect. So if we wouldn't have the reflections effect on our master or somewhere lower in our hierarchy, the computed reverb effects from Meta wouldn't be applied. Then we quickly switch back to the event editor window inside of FMOD. To have a representative sound of like something continuous going on, which we can then use inside of Unity and move it around, so we sort of get a feeling of how the Meta plugins work for sound. I added this Spanish continuous voila just going on. But yeah, you just use your according event. On there, I'm going to add the Meta XR audio source. As you already might see from the visual appearance, it really resembles FMOD's Spatializer. And it's basically more or less the same thing and just replacing FMOD Spatializer. So be careful not to have FMOD Spatializer and your Meta XR audio source on the same event. We could dive into some of the settings. The basically important thing to notice is enable acoustics, routes that event through all the computed acoustics. So you could save some CPU if you want to turn it off for some events, but you could just use the FMOD Spatializer instead. And as with the FMOD Spatializer, you can adjust the curve of the fade out. I'm just going to stick with the default one for now. So back to Unity. The first thing I'd like to point out is actually how way better the Meta Spatializer actually sounds, because it binauralizes the signal way better. I honestly don't really know what's going on, but like you're able to track even if sounds are behind you, which is honestly a great effect. So for that, I recommend switching to headphones really quick, which I'm going to do as well. Yeah, so inside of Unity, we're quickly going to add a cube, so we have something to visualize where our sound source currently is, and then attach a FMOD Studio event emitter to that. And from the FMOD event picker, I'm going to drag in that event, trigger it on start, and stop it on destroy. And then, yeah, just going to place the cube somewhat over here. So let's quickly have a listen to how that sounds.
También sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche. Eso sale un montón.
¿Vos sabés hacer bombones? Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo. Hay que tener tiempo.
No es fácil para hacer la nuez, el dulce de leche y después la...
¿Y de qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el pimiento para pimentón.
Sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche. Eso sale un montón.
¿Vos sabés hacer bombones?
Sí se hace.
Yeah, honestly, I don't know. That's just amazing to me how binauralized that already works. Nice. So the next thing we're going to add as a component from the package is the so-called room acoustics component. So I'm gonna add a new game object where I can throw this on. So of all the Meta XR components, we're looking for the audio room acoustics. To understand how this is working, it's basically simulating a cube or like a room around you. This like not really advanced, but it's like a nice way to get started with the Meta Acoustics properties. And it's always around your listener. So if we, for example, move our player capsule a bit more forward, so it's always sort of attached to the listener and changing with that. So the box we're seeing over here is defined by those sizes. So we could say it's like a bit larger or anything like that. And then we're able to define properties of that room. So we could say it has, I don't know, a concrete sidewall and a tile ceiling, which is like a cool feature, and you can change those properties while your project is running. But to me, this is not what the meta package is about. We're still quickly going to have a listen on how this works and how it sounds. And I'm going to change some of those properties on the fly.
¿Qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el pimiento, pero pimentón.
Sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso sale un
sí,
montón.
¿vos sabés hacer bombones?
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo.
Sí,
Hay que tener tiempo.
Sale más también el
También
pimiento, pero
salen,
pimentón.
sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso sale un
sí,
montón.
¿vos sabés hacer bombones?
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo. Hay que tener tiempo.
¿Qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el
También
pimiento, pero
salen,
pimentón.
sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso sale un
sí,
montón.
¿vos sabés hacer bombones?
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo.
La nuez, el dulce de leche y después la...
¿Qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el
También
pimiento, pero
salen,
pimentón.
sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso sale un
sí,
montón.
¿vos sabés hacer bombones?
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo.
Yeah, I guess you get the idea. It's like nice customization options, but it gets a little bit, detailed or too detailed for the things you might want to set up. So there's actually one, to me, really game-changing feature in the whole Meta XR audio package, which as well resolves all this tiny setting changing, which is acoustic ray tracing. This basically means we're scanning all our environment, baking it once, so we have like an imprint of our scene, and then calculating rays bouncing off all of those different materials. And that really gives a representative feeling of the room. So to set it up, the first step we basically need to do is to make everything static, which, don't move. So it's normally as well best practice for your whole environment to just set those things to static and change the children as well. Static in the Unity context basically means it's not going to move in runtime, which allows for some computing efficiency. So the room acoustics component can be deleted for now, and I'm going to create a new game object where I'm going to add the so-called acoustic map. And on our environment, we're going to start with the acoustic geometry. So Meta XR acoustic geometry, and you already see everything's turning yellow and it's getting scanned by all those vertices and everything, which allows Meta to calculate sort of the shape of the room. So for that, we're going to click Bake Mesh. Keep in mind that you need to do that every time your scene changes, but this can be set up so it automatically updates the acoustic geometry every time your scene changes. Just something you have to keep in mind. Then for the acoustic map, as said before, we're going to add the corresponding component and then bake acoustic. Now, after the bake acoustics process is done, you will see those little yellow dots representing your acoustic map. So we know that process is done. And now we sort of get to the interesting part, because we now can define custom materials and assign them to objects in our game world. So those objects in the game world have some sort of acoustic properties. With the Meta SDK installed, we have this option of creating acoustic material properties scriptable object inside of Unity. So I'm quickly going to do that as SO acoustic material. And for now, we are quickly going to select the preset, I don't know, the ceramic tiles. And we're going to set the color, because then in our game world, we can see which material has this acoustic, which game object has this acoustic material assigned by that color. So, for example, if we say that that inner block should be a ceramic tile, then we can switch to that and in here throw on the acoustic materials component and assign our scriptable object. Now we quickly need to bake the acoustic geometry again, which is, by the way, linked to the acoustic map, so you don't have to do both. And you now see that it's updated and represented in that red color for our ceramic tile. So, for quickly having a listen, we can walk through the game world and listen to that voice inside of that structure to see how it sounds.
Sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso
eso
sale
no
un
sé si
montón.
vos sabés hacer bombones.
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo.
Sí,
Hay que tener tiempo.
No es fácil para hacer la nuez, el dulce de leche y después la...
To make the effect a bit more clear, I'm going to mute the character sounds, so steps and jumps and all of that, and as well increase the reverb reach and the early reflection sent to some unrealistic amount, so we quickly just have an impression of how the reverb of our setup environment now will sound. As I'm synced with live update to FMOD, those changes will apply immediately and we can have a listen.
Sí, también salen los bombones, ¿viste? Las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso
eso no
sale
sé
un
si
montón.
vos sabés hacer bombones.
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo. Hay que tener tiempo.
As you might have noticed, even with those extreme settings inside of FMOD, it's still rather on the realistic side, so it's not like creating those huge, immense reverbs, especially for those smaller spaces. So it's great for mimicking, realistic spaces, but keep in mind that we have additional options to combine even inside of the Meta SDK for other reverb settings, especially as setting up all those acoustic materials can be sort of, tidysome, because you might have many different props where you want to assign those acoustic materials to. As a side note, you're able to assign in the project settings Physic materials to acoustic materials if you already have those Physic materials set up in your project. That might help a little bit. The fallback solution Meta supplies are so-called control zones. I'm quickly going to create a new game object called control zone and add the corresponding component. As we can see down here, it's actually sort of similar to the setup we've seen in the snapshot video, because we have this outer box where we can define a fade-in zone to our main reverb, and then right in the middle where there is this fully filled cube, this is where the maximum amount of reverb is applied. You can actually draw in some custom curves here, but I'm simply going to drag that up completely so we have, a really strong image of how this works. Regarding listener position, those control zones actually work like you would expect it from a video game, because it's only depending on the emitter being inside that reverb zone or not, and then being influenced by that reverb, and the listener is just doing his own thing. So we don't have to think about if the listener is in the same zone and all of that stuff. Even though this is sort of confusing, or may sound sort of confusing, I really like the intuitive setup of just having your own game object for those reverb zones, being able to drag them around easily, scale them in whichever direction you need to apply custom curves, and without the need of having multiple trigger zones to activate them. So, to quickly have a listen, I'm going to start the scene and drag around the emitter cube and as well walk around with the player capsule.
¿Qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el
También
pimiento para
salen,
pimentón.
sí, también salen los bombones, viste las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso
no
sale
sé
un
si
montón.
vos sabés hacer bombones.
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo. Hay que tener tiempo.
No es fácil para hacer la nuez, el dulce de leche y después la...
¿Y después qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el
también
pimiento para
salen,
pimentón.
sí, también salen los bombones, viste las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Sí, pero
Eso
no
sale
sé
un
si
montón.
vos sabés hacer bombones.
Sí se hace, pero no, hay que tener tiempo.
No es fácil para hacer
As a quick demonstration, I'm gonna place the reverb control zone inside of our building so we have a more, a better feeling of a visual representation of a room combined with that acoustic property.
También salen, sí, también salen los...
El que sale más también el
También
pimiento para
salen,
pimentón.
sí, también salen los bombones, viste las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
Pero no, lleva mucho tiempo. Hay que tener tiempo.
No es fácil para hacer la nuez, el dulce de leche y después la...
¿Y después qué más sale mucho? El que sale más también el pimiento para pimentón.
Sí, también salen los bombones, viste las nueces confitadas con dulce de leche.
¿Vos sabés hacer bombones?
Sí se hace, pero no, lleva mucho tiempo. Hay que tener tiempo.
Going back to FMOD, I want to point out another really cool thing about the Meta SDK, because as we've seen before, there's actually this other effect included, being the Meta XR Audio Ambisonic effect. There are no settings at all, which might look a little confusing for an effect, but it basically gives you the opportunity to play back Ambisonic files inside of FMOD, which has been sort of a struggle before, so it's cool to have that simply included with that Meta SDK as well. Lastly, I want to point out some disadvantages of the Meta package, because I think there at some point have to be some. First thing is that all the sounds you want to have influenced by the Meta package have to be mono or treated as mono. So even if you have stereo files, you can click on that incoming meter and select mono, so it's converted to mono, because else the Meta XR audio source won't handle the panning and stuff accordingly. I mean, for binauralization, you probably expect that to be mono anyway, and I mean, regarding game audio effects, most sound effects should be mono, not to occupy too much space, but still that can be a limitation. Then another sort of, I guess, special thing, but especially if you have rather large projects, FMOD gives you the opportunity to have your FMOD spatializer and select override the min-max distance. This is especially interesting if you want to use that spatializer on multiple events, because then you can, say, convert to shared effect and then use it on multiple instances, and with that slider simply change min and max distance of all of those events where the shared effect is on. As we don't have the override min-max distance slider on the Meta XR audio source at the moment, you would have to find some sort of workaround or actually customly adjust the min-max distance for all the events, which would be quite a pain. Then, thinking back in Unity, it might be sort of limiting to always think of the baked mesh button whenever you're changing your environment, but that's, I guess, fine. You could handle that, but it's actually more about the general file management, because when you have really, really big scenes or complex scenes and multiple scenes at once, you really have to think about when to load those acoustic geometries and acoustic maps. This is just something to keep in mind additionally, when to load which thing. And especially if you haven't worked with the Meta SDK before, that might feel a bit overwhelming, because it's, especially in larger scenes, somewhat a huge file, can go up to some megabytes. And if the loading time is off, then your reverb environment will glitch. So you have to be careful with that. And then lastly, to keep in mind, as we're using ray tracing for acoustic purposes, but still ray tracing, this is pretty intensive on CPU. So probably for mobile games, you really should consider if you have the processing power to use this feature at all. I want to point out at this moment of my video series that all of these reverb concerns are mostly interesting for first-person video games, because thinking of top-down games, even isometric games and other genres, you probably even get along with FMOD snapshots functionality and don't have to worry about anything I said in the videos before. Awesome. This was mostly the finish of my video series about FMOD's reverb handling. There will be one last bonus video where I will compare FMOD's functionality to Wise functionalities regarding reverb. Yeah, but I really hope this small series about reverb and FMOD helped you with your game audio project, and hope to see you in the future.